Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 625. Releasing August 21 on digital is The G, a crime thriller that stars Dale Dickey as a mysterious older woman who seeks revenge on a corrupt legal guardian who destroyed her life. And joining me now on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is the star Dale Dickey and director of The G, Karl Hearne. Dale and Karl, I thank you both very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's really interesting, Karl, how in the past month, you're the second filmmaker I've talked to where your a grandmother or a grandparent has been an inspiration for the main character. The previous film I spoke about is a Filmer with Josh Margolin, and here I am talking about The G. What was it about your grandmother, Karl, that really inspired you to create the character that Dale plays in this movie? What was about her personality, her presence, her essence that kind of that brought about this story? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, first of all, I've heard about Thelma, and I heard it's a great film, but uh, from what I hear, it's the opposite of this one. And there was just a review of the G in Variety, and they said this is the if that's the Nerf ball version, this is the brass knuckles version.
Oh
And
yeah, yes, sounds good. Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds about right. But I mean, that's a different kind of film, from what I understand. I think it's a comedy. But yeah, the film was inspired first and foremost by my grandmother, who was a pretty intense, pretty often very difficult person. Someone I really admired, but was also sort of afraid of. And for sure, I mythologized. Yeah, I've mythologized that character and to a certain extent in the film. And then it was taking that person and putting them in this nightmarish sort of dystopian seeming situation. It's actually very true to life. It's a situation that
Mm.
happens frequently in North America, and seeing what would come of that. So those are the two main inspirations for the film.
Dale, when you receive a script like The G, and you read, you know, Carl's words and you look at the story like that, what's the first thing that kind of speaks to you? Is it character? Is it story? I'm just really curious about the processing about in going about selecting the films that you want to do and how you'd like to approach them.
Um, well, I think particularly with the G, I think always the first thing that stands out is the story. Is it a good story? It can be well written and might need some work, or it can just hit you right away. But the character seemingly one dimensional and is quite complex. So I look at the through line of the character. Um, Matthew, I've played so many supporting roles in and out of the years, and I've not always, the scripts come to me because I'm to audition. So don't necessarily haven't been able to pick and choose. But more lately with scripts like getting the G from Karl or a love song where have asked me to come and work with them, which is lovely. I have a chance to sort of make the decision. It's just I'm usually terrified of it. Number one, because it's a lead role, but I always look for story first, and I find that I learned this in theater. The more you go back and keep rereading the script or the screenplay over and over, you just never stop finding things. And it's just like once you get into filming, you start seeing all these things come to reality that you just read on the page, and now they've come to life and they're shifting a little bit. But I've learned to be a better judge of script writing. I don't consider myself a master of it, but I can certainly tell if something speaks to me. If I know organically it speaks to me and I can portray that truthfully and also challenge me, then that's what draws me to it. That was very long-winded. I apologize.
Oh, no, not at all, Dale. Not at all. Please don't apologize. It's great to be able to hear your take on that. And Karl, you said before that it may seem kind of like dystopian in some ways, the scenario of the film, but it's incredibly real, like as you said as well. The whole guardianship scam that is center of the G is such a prevalent issue in the US And for people who don't know what that is, it's kind of, I don't know how to really describe it in certain ways. Disturbing. This is, the whole how someone that who isn't associated with a person, an elderly person, can come in legally and take over their life and sell off their assets and do it like that. I mean, what was the first time you heard of that? And I'm sure delving into that legal kind of like minefield of what that is. It must have been incredibly disturbing for you to come across the details, as it was for me when I was just trying to do some research for our interview here. It's an incredibly sad and frustrating thing that's happening right now to so many elderly people in the US.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of a continuum of these things from the downright just illegal scams to these quasi-legal, and then to these fully legal sort of like an industrial old age complex. Those are the ones that shocked me the most. There was a lot of articles written about, there was one amazing article in the New Yorker many years ago about this.
Mm.
And certain states were well known for it. In Nevada, for example, at a certain point in time, you could actually, with some doctor's notes and the signature of a county clerk, not even a judge, you didn't have to go to court, you could actually take over someone's life, their assets, what drugs they take, who, including family members, are allowed to see them. And this is just some clerk's signature. It's all you needed. So if you put that in the film, I don't think anyone would believe it. It seems too wild. So this film is, it also has a genre element. It's a dark thriller, but it is situated in this very real, elder abuse and exploitation. And there's something I think very cathartic about having one of the victims manage to fight back against this. In real life, that unfortunately doesn't happen very often. There's actually a nonprofit organization that we did another interview with the London Times about this issue, and they also interviewed someone who's running a nonprofit seeking justice and advocating for real life victims of this kind of thing. And obviously, this is not a documentary by any stretch of the imagination, but it was still gratifying. The head of that organization reached out to us and said, thank you for at least calling attention to this issue, because it's not something that gets talked about that often.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love.
Dale, when it comes to the character you play in the movie, I mentioned in the introduction, she comes from, there's a mysterious past. There's hints as to what that past is throughout the movie. When you take on a character like this, do you plot your own kind of backstories? Do you talk to Karl about things that maybe aren't said on screen about who she is, what she's gone through, what circumstances might have led her to do the things she's done and be where she is at that moment? I'm really curious about your process in regards to character building.
Yes, I think it's a little of both. I always, have done my own in my mind, and I will write it down like in a journal or my script pages, my backstory for what I feel she is. But I always defer to the writer especially, and the director, Karl, who could give me some information, particularly because this is based on his grandmother. And I felt like growing up in kind of Appalachia in East Tennessee, I knew some women in the mountains that terrified me. But we were talking earlier about choosing scripts, and I think that a script doesn't have to have a message that we're trying to get through to the audience. It's nice if it does. And even though this is not a political statement movie about these circumstances, it's extremely important, and it touched a chord with me. I've cared for both my parents have passed now, and I helped care for them, and it makes me wonder. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, Matt. It makes me wonder, had my parents had money and not had anyone to help them, this could have happened to them. And I saw similar cases just in the assisted living I had to move my father in. you just never know. And we just disregard our elderly so quickly. And I was shocked when nurses were like, it's wonderful that you're showing up. And I'm like, well, that's what kids do, right? And they went, no. And then if there's no one around, it leaves room for these people to come in and take advantage of these poor people. And I had to go off on that for just a moment.
No, don't have to apologize whatsoever. It's incredible. You said yes, Karl.
I was just, if I can add something to that, just to agree with Dale, that it's not, we're not trying to make some kind of direct socio-political commentary. I mean, it's not a polemic, but at the same time, the film is implicitly dealing with these issues. It's implicitly, there's something, political, just by situating it in this sort of, bizarre and very true to life kind of scenario, just in a different way, just by having an older female lead in a revenge thrill, a dark thriller. It's a revenge film. That's something that I haven't seen before. We don't have to come out and make a big direct statement. Implicitly, that's something new. That's something that you just don't see. And because Dale is so convincing in the role, in a way, in a strange way, it almost hasn't been talked about enough how unusual that is. But it's just because I think the audience immediately buys it and they just talk about it as if, yeah, it's a revenge thriller and whatever. But there is no other film like that with an older female protagonist. So, I think these things are implicitly political without trying to go out there and, make a statement.
Karl, I guess Dale.
No, I just had a quick thought on something Karl and I specifically discussed in terms of background and preparation and backstory. I was mostly interested because her childhood is brought out in the script with what her relationship with Chip was. The fact that they had this beautiful, wonderful, thriving relationship, because she alienates everyone. And for some reason, he stayed with her. That was the kind of thing I wanted to build with Karl and with Greg on what that relationship was. So off to your question. Sorry. I mean, quit apologizing. It's a Southern thing.
Yeah, I have one more thing to add to that too, if I may. That's a great example because so the song, there's a song in the film that is by Billy Joe Shaver. It's an amazing song, Hill Country love song. And so my idea was that back when they were younger, this was sort of their song. Now this isn't stated in the film, but this was something that the actor Greg playing Chip, I went and talked to him about, I talked to Dale about, and Greg went off on his own and recorded the song himself with his guitar and then sent it to me. And I shared that with Dale. So that there were, in the limited time we had, there was these kinds of things that do add a kind of a certain soul to the backstory. Even when they aren't directly in the film, they find a way in there,
They inform it, yeah.
I'm really wanted to touch on also, Karl, is that when it comes to something like a revenge thriller, sometimes filmmakers or producers tend to go down the exploitation route, gunfights, all that kind of stuff, right? I'm just curious, when it comes to doing something like The G, it is a revenge thriller, but to me, it's much more of a kind of like a drama as well as anything else. It's about the building of this character. It's about the circumstances that she finds herself in. Was there any pressure whatsoever, though, considering the marketplace kind of dictates sometimes how a film can be made, that people might want to say, hey, I think, we might need a little bit of a Liam Neeson kind of kung fu fight here or there to kind of make things like that? And if there was, what was it like trying to stand your ground and make sure that the vision you had for this movie and what you wanted, this character to be and how she wanted to portray herself in the film was how you wanted to see it fit and not how the marketplace wanted to dictate it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. That's
Yeah.
not what I've gotten before. I guess there's two parts to that. Yes, there's some pressure to make it more of a genre and maybe add more action. And then in the billing of it, the distributors also want that afterwards. And they're actually the ones that bill it as a revenge thriller. So I tend to agree with you. For me, it's a film that's between genres. But what the marketplace, at least the gatekeepers in the marketplace, they want something that they can easily pigeonhole. Like for me, it's like, it's a revenge drama, maybe a dark thriller, but that crime drama as well. But I don't really personally care that much about those labels. You know, I'm just trying to make a good film. And for me, you know, there are moments of intense violence, but for me, it's a character-driven film. And so that was what was most of interest to me. And it's building, in particular, the character of the G and her relationships at the beginning of the film. That's really where I was more focused. And yeah, no, I this is I guess the potential problem you get is if it gets billed as a Liam Neeson dark thriller, which it absolutely is not. You know, people who go seeing it are going to be like, well, that's not Taken, and that's, to me, obviously it's ridiculous because it's not intended to be Taken. It's a much more subtle film. It's a character-driven film, but it does get pretty intense as well. And there are some parts to it that I would say are maybe darker than anything in Taken or anything in a Liam Neeson film. But it's just not that kind of film. I think it's a more complex film, you know, and for me personally, that makes it more interesting.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
For me, Dale, it's a film that reminds me of the movies that I loved growing up watching, and the movies that I absolutely adored were these character-driven films from the 1970s, movies by the likes of William Friedkin, Sidney Lumet, movies like that, where these characters are put in these impossible situations, but it's the way that they combat it is a kind of like this flashbang kind of stuff that we were talking about, but it was done through kind of like a lot of introspection as much as it was anything related to kind of like a exhibitionist kind of like action stuff as well. And I was curious, Dale, yourself, is that something that you kind of harken back to as well in regards to the performance of this film? That's kind of character-driven kind of 1970s kind of movies and the performances that came from that era?
Absolutely. And I just love your questions. Just when you said it, my mind is going the reel of all the films I saw. I was very lucky. My parents divorced when I was really little. But my maternal grandparents and my mother took me to everything, plays and film and ballet and opera, but film particularly. I saw so many movies I probably should not have seen as young as I was. I remember seeing Clockwork Orange when I was 11. That did a little damage. But being exposed to that, it's like learning from watching, learning from observing. So then as I began to study later on as an actor, and I studied a lot of different methods, and I went to a liberal arts college with a great theater program. In terms of being able to teach what I know, I'm not sure I could really do that appropriately, because so much of what I know is just what seep into my bones from watching films as a kid. I'm sure it's Quentin Tarantino, the same kind of sensibility. It's in his bones. That's what the kind of films he makes. But yeah, film actors, I realize more and more, I'll go back and see films again, and I'm like, yeah, I remember seeing that at this age, and Meryl Streep and Diane Keaton, but Christopher Walken, De Niro. There's so many people I would rewatch films over and over again. I love them, and it's just sort of inherent where I want to be a storyteller and do that kind of work, I guess. I'm not making any sense. I apologize. More coffee, perhaps. Quit apologizing.
But it's great. I absolutely love what you're giving me here, Dale. Final thing I wanted to touch on, less of a question, more of a pitch to both of you. I want to see more of the Anne Hunter story. I'm really curious about the relationship between Anne and Chip. There's a line in the movie where Chip is being put upon, and Anne says something like, if he was 30 years ago, he would have torn you apart. I like to see a Godfather Part 2 style story where we have on one end, you see Anne going back to her old stomping grounds with her granddaughter, and she's retracing her own ground, but then we go back 40, 50 years where the young Anne and Chip were in that starting ground, and you actually saw, you know, the stuff that they got up to at that time when they were younger, and going back and forth between the two. I don't know about you. Could work, couldn't work, but I think, the Anne and Chip story is something that I love to see. I want to see what made them what they are, and especially what made Anne what she was, because I reckon that will be a phenomenal kind of continuation of this story. What do you think of that, Carl?
This is something we've already been talking about and developing, actually. Sometimes like at Q&As, we joke about it, but then there's other times where like a few people have actually approached me specifically about doing a film about the backstory. I mean, one was like they wanted a sort of a high-end HBO style series about the backstory. Another one was more akin to what you were saying, because one of the things we've discussed is if it's all backstory, you might not get to see Dale, right? Like you might
Yeah.
have this 20 years. So we also discussed this back and forth, the Godfather 2 thing that you just said. So, I like that idea because, for me, Dale needs to be in it. Dale needs to be front and center because she's just so amazing as this character. So something that has a bit of both, I think it's a really interesting idea. And it's something that a lot of people have brought up. So, I mean, I think that shows there's some interest.
Yeah, and I think it is a potential here for this kind of like the desert rose in the movie. It's potential for this to kind of flourish as well and survive in forward. So, and everyone out there, before that happens, you got to watch the G, of course, August 21 on digital. I really recommend people really check. If you're like me and you like kind of like your character-driven kind of hard edge crime movies, this is a movie you have to see. And it stars, of course, Dale Dickey, and as I said, Dale numerous times now. You're one of my favorites. Also, it's always great when you kind of surprise me on screen. I watched Horizon a few weeks ago at the cinema, and it's like, oh, Dale's there. I didn't know Dale was in this, and that made the experience that much better as well. So, Dale, I thank you so very much for your time, and you too, Carl. And congratulations to both on the film. It's a great movie. It really is. And congrats to you both. And again, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I loved it. Loved speaking with you. All the best.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.